The year was 2347, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Confederation for just over 100 years. In all that time, the alien species who ruled the stars had never once looked at humans as equals. They smiled at human ambassadors the way a parent smiles at a child who wants to sit at the adult table. They allowed Earth a seat on the council, but they never truly listened when humans spoke. Commander Jake Harmon stood in the observation deck of Luna Base, watching the massive display screen that covered the entire wall. The broadcast showed the Galactic Council in session, dozens of alien species gathered in their grand chamber on the capital world of Prime. Their bodies came in all shapes and sizes. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few were made of pure energy held together by ancient technology. All of them shared one thing in common. They all believed they were better than the humans who sat quietly in the back row. The Empire had declared war 3 months ago. They were a brutal species who had built their civilization on conquest and blood. Their ships were faster than anything the Confederation had ever seen. Their weapons could crack a planet in half, and their soldiers felt no fear, no mercy, and no doubt. They believed the galaxy belonged to them, and they were taking it one star system at a time. Jake watched as the human ambassador, a tired-looking woman named Lane, stood to address the council. She offered Earth's help in the war. She spoke of human courage, human determination, and human willingness to fight for their allies. When she finished, the chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the laughter began. It was not loud or cruel. It was worse than that. It was the soft, polite laughter of beings who found the offer amusing but not serious. The ambassador, a tall creature with silver skin and 4 arms, thanked humanity for their enthusiasm. He suggested that Earth's small fleet might be useful for supply runs far from the front lines. The council moved on to other matters. Jake turned away from the screen, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Admiral Gray stood behind him, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her uniform perfect despite the late hour. She had been watching his reaction with careful eyes. "They will learn," she said quietly. "When the time is right, they will all learn." Jake looked at her. He had served under Admiral for 15 years, and in all that time, he had never fully understood the calm certainty in her voice. She spoke as if she knew something the rest of the galaxy did not, as if humanity had a secret that would change everything. He wanted to ask her what she meant, but before he could speak, alarms began to sound throughout the base. Another Confederation world had fallen. They had destroyed the colony on 7, killing 2 billion beings in a matter of hours. The war was getting closer, and the elder species were starting to panic. Far away from Luna Base, deep beneath the Nevada desert on Earth, Dr. Cole worked in a facility that did not exist on any map. The complex stretched for miles underground, filled with laboratories and workshops and machines that hummed with strange energy. Armed guards stood at every door, but they were not there to keep enemies out. They were there to keep secrets in. Had spent his entire adult life in this place. He had given up a normal career, a family, and any hope of recognition for his work. He had done this because 70 years ago, a team of explorers had found something on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. Buried beneath miles of ice, they had discovered the wreckage of a ship that was older than human civilization, older than the dinosaurs, older than life on Earth itself. The ship had belonged to a species that the scientists simply called the precursors. No one knew what they had looked like or where they had come from. They had vanished from the galaxy millions of years before the first Confederation species learned to make fire. But they had left something behind. They had left technology so advanced that it made them look like children playing with sticks. Stood in front of a massive ring of black metal that filled the center of the main laboratory. The ring was 30 meters across, covered in symbols that glowed with a soft blue light. His team had spent decades studying this artifact, learning its secrets one painful step at a time. They had failed more times than he could count. They had lost good people to accidents that the laws of physics, but they had never given up. Tonight, after 70 years of work, they were finally ready. Looked at his assistant, a young woman named Lisa Park, who stood at the control console with trembling hands. She had joined the project 5 years ago, full of hope and curiosity. Now she understood what they were about to do. She understood that if they succeeded, nothing would ever be the same. "Begin the activation sequence," said. Lisa nodded and pressed a series of buttons. The ring began to vibrate, filling the chamber with a deep sound that felt in his bones. The symbols grew brighter, shifting from blue to white to a color that had no name. The air inside the ring started to shimmer and fold, twisting in ways that hurt to look at. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap, reality tore open. Inside the ring, there was no longer empty space. There was a window into somewhere else, a dimension of pure darkness lit by distant stars that burned with cold fire. Stared into the shadow realm, feeling tears run down his cheeks. They had done it. They had opened the gateway that the precursors had designed for humanity to find. He picked up his communicator and sent a message to Admiral on Luna Base. The message was only 3 words, but those 3 words would change the course of galactic history. "The gateway works." On the other side of the solar system, Grace received the message and allowed herself a small smile. She walked to her window and looked out at the stars, thinking of all the species who had laughed at humanity, who had dismissed them as primitives, who had refused their help when it was offered in good faith. Now, she whispered to the darkness, "We begin." In hidden shipyards scattered across the solar system, in places that no alien had ever seen, hundreds of ships began to wake from their long sleep. Their crews had been training for this moment their entire lives. Their weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. Their engines could carry them through the shadow realm itself, appearing anywhere in the universe without warning. The thought they were winning the war. The Confederation thought they were losing it. None of them knew that humanity had been preparing for this day since before most of them were born. The Shadow Gateway was open, and everything was about to change. 6 months had passed since Dr. Cole opened the Shadow Gateway, and the galaxy had grown darker with each passing day. The Empire moved through Confederation space like a fire through dry grass, burning everything in its path. 14 star systems had fallen. Billions of beings had died or been enslaved. The elder species who had ruled the stars for thousands of years were beginning to understand a terrible truth. They were losing the war and nothing could stop it. The Galactic Council met in emergency session on Prime. The Grand Chamber that had once echoed with confident voices was now filled with fear. Ambassadors shouted at each other, blaming their neighbors for failures and demanding impossible solutions. The representative no longer smiled his superior smile. His silver face was drawn with exhaustion, and his 4 hands shook as he spoke. "We must consider evacuation," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Our core worlds cannot be defended. We must save what we can and retreat to the outer regions." The chamber erupted in chaos. Species that had been allies for centuries turned on each other. Ancient grudges surfaced, old wounds reopened, and in the back row the human ambassador sat in silence, watching it all unfold. Lane had stopped offering humanity's help weeks ago. There was no point anymore. The Council had made their opinion of Earth perfectly clear. But now, as the elder species tore themselves apart, she received a message on her private communicator. It was from Admiral, and it contained only 2 words. "Stand ready." Felt her heart begin to beat faster. She did not know exactly what the Admiral meant, but she understood that something was coming. Something that would make all of this fear and chaos look like nothing at all. Deep in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, Lieutenant Commander Maya Torres walked through the corridors of her ship with quick, confident steps. The USS Nightfall had been officially decommissioned 3 years ago. According to all public records, the vessel had been scrapped for parts and its crew reassigned to civilian duties. The truth was very different. The Nightfall was one of 300 ships in the Shadow Squadron, a fleet that humanity had been building in secret for decades. The vessels were hidden in places no alien would think to look. Some floated in hollowed-out asteroids. Others rested beneath the frozen methane seas of Titan. A few had been constructed in the crushing depths of Jupiter's atmosphere, where only human engineering could survive. Maya entered the engineering bay and found her chief engineer already at work. Ben was a large man with gentle eyes and hands that could fix anything. He had grown up on a farm in Kansas, dreaming of the stars. Now he spent his days maintaining technology that most engineers would not believe was possible. "How are we looking?" Maya asked. Ben wiped grease from his fingers and smiled. "The shadow drive is running perfectly. Better than perfectly, actually. I made some adjustments to the phase harmonics. Should give us an extra 0.3 seconds of stability during transit." Maya nodded. She had flown through the shadow realm dozens of times during training exercises, but she still felt a knot of fear in her stomach whenever she thought about it. The shadow was not a place meant for human eyes. It was a dimension of absolute darkness, where the normal rules of space and time did not apply. Ships that entered it could appear anywhere in the universe instantly, stepping out of reality itself and back again. But if something went wrong during transit, if the drive failed or the calculations were off by even a tiny amount, the ship would be lost forever in the endless black. "The crew?" Maya asked. "Ready and eager," Ben said. "Everyone knows this is what we trained for. When the order comes, we will not hesitate." The order came 3 days later. Admiral stood on the bridge of the USS, the flagship of the Shadow Squadron. That was larger than anything the Confederation had ever built, but it was only one of many. Around her, scattered across the solar system in their hidden bases, the rest of the fleet waited for her words. She opened a channel to all ships simultaneously. Her voice was calm and steady, the voice of someone who had been preparing for this moment for longer than most of her crew had been alive. "This is Admiral. The Galactic Council has finally asked for our help. They want us to serve as cannon fodder, to delay the while the elder species run away. They still see us as primitives, as expendable, as nothing more than a minor inconvenience to be used and discarded." She paused, letting her words sink in. "They are about to learn how wrong they are." Maya listened to the Admiral's voice in her quarters aboard the Nightfall. Around her, she could hear her crew moving to their stations, their footsteps quick with excitement and nervous energy. "For 70 years, the Admiral continued, we have worked in secret. We have built ships unlike anything this galaxy has ever seen. We have mastered technology that the elder species cannot even imagine. We have done this not for conquest, not for glory, but because we knew this day would come. We knew that someday humanity would be called upon to save the galaxy, and we wanted to be ready." Ben appeared in Maya's doorway, his face lit with a fierce grin. He had been waiting for this his entire life. They all had. "The Shadow Gateway is open," Admiral said. "In 6 hours, we will use it to appear in the heart of controlled space. We will strike without warning. We will show the galaxy what humans are capable of. And we will save every species that ever looked down on us, every civilization that ever laughed at our offer of friendship." Maya rose from her chair and walked to the bridge of the Nightfall. Her crew was already at their stations, their eyes fixed on their screens, their hands steady on their controls. They were young and old, men and women, people from every nation and background that Earth had ever produced. They were united by a single purpose: to prove that humanity belonged among the stars. "We are the Shadow Squadron," Admiral said, "and today we step out of the shadows." The fleet began to move. Asteroid bases opened their hidden doors. Ships rose from beneath alien moons. Vessels that had been sleeping in the darkness of space for years powered up their engines and oriented themselves toward a single point: the Shadow Gateway that Cole had activated 6 months ago. Commander Jake Harmon stood on the bridge of the beside Admiral. He had been promoted 3 times in the past 6 months, as humanity quietly prepared for this moment. Now, he was second in command of the most powerful fleet the galaxy had ever known. "Are you ready, Commander?" the Admiral asked. Jake thought about all the times the aliens had dismissed humanity. He thought about the laughter in the council chamber. He thought about the billions who had died because the elder species were too proud to accept help from beings they considered beneath them. "I have been ready my whole life," he said. They entered the shadow gateway first. For one terrible moment, Jake felt reality dissolve around him. The bridge disappeared into absolute darkness. He could not see, could not hear, could not feel anything except a cold pressure that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then light returned. They emerged into normal space, and Jake looked out at a field of stars he had never seen before. They were deep in territory now, thousands of light years from Earth, in a position no Confederation ship had ever reached. Behind them, the shadow gateway flickered as ship after ship poured through. The nightfall appeared, followed by the Horizon, the Phoenix, the Aurora, and hundreds more. In minutes, the entire Shadow Squadron had assembled in enemy space, ready for war. Jake allowed himself a small smile. They had no idea what was coming. The Armada hung in space above the burning world of Prime, their dark ships arranged in perfect formation like a wall of black metal against the stars. They had just finished destroying another Confederation colony, adding 2 billion more deaths to their growing total. Their commander, a massive creature named, stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the planet below turn from green to ash. He felt nothing but satisfaction. Then his sensors detected something impossible. Space itself seemed to tear open behind his fleet. A wound appeared in reality, a circle of absolute darkness that swallowed the light of nearby stars. Had conquered dozens of species in his long career, but he had never seen anything like this. He ordered his ships to turn and face this new phenomenon, confident in the power of his weapons and the skill of his warriors. From the darkness, ships emerged. They came in a flood, one after another, vessels of blue and white bearing a symbol that did not recognize. There were hundreds of them, sleek and angular, their hulls gleaming with a strange light. They moved in perfect coordination, spreading out across the battlefield in formations that seemed to shift and flow like water. Studied the approaching fleet with cold eyes. He did not know who these newcomers were, but he did not fear them. No species in the galaxy could match military power. Whatever technology had allowed them to appear so suddenly would not save them from destruction. He opened a communication channel and broadcast to the unknown fleet. His voice was deep and harsh, filled with the arrogance of a commander who had never known defeat. "Unidentified vessels, you have entered territory. Surrender immediately or you will be destroyed. This is your only warning." For a long moment there was silence. Then a human voice answered, calm and clear. "This is Commander Jake Harmon of the United Earth Defense Fleet. We represent the species you call primitive, the species your council dismissed, the species you thought was not worth your attention." Felt a flicker of confusion. Humans, the weak creatures from the small blue planet. He had studied reports on humanity when they first joined the Confederation. They were fragile, short-lived, and possessed technology barely worth mentioning. The idea that they could pose a threat to his fleet was laughable. "You have made a fatal mistake," replied. "Your species will be erased from the galaxy for this insult." "We came in peace a century ago," Jake said. "We offered our friendship, our help, our willingness to stand beside you against any threat. The galaxy dismissed us as children, as primitives, as nothing." Jake paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made even seasoned warriors shift uncomfortably. "We are not nothing." The commander gave the order to attack. His fleet fired as one, thousands of weapons releasing beams of concentrated energy toward the human ships. It was enough firepower to crack a moon, enough destruction to end any conventional battle in seconds. The human ships vanished. stared at his sensors in disbelief. The enemy vessels had not been destroyed. They had simply disappeared, phasing out of normal space like ghosts fading into mist. His weapon's fire passed through empty vacuum and continued into the darkness beyond. Then the humans reappeared. They emerged from nothing, materializing inside the formation itself. They were everywhere at once, above and below and between his ships, their positions impossible to predict. They opened fire with weapons that had never seen before, beams of light that ignored his shields entirely. Warships began to explode, their hulls pierced by attacks that should not have been able to touch them. On the bridge of the USS Nightfall, Maya Torres guided her ship through the chaos of battle with steady hands. The shadow drive hummed beneath her feet, ready to shift them out of reality at a moment's notice. She had trained for this her entire career, running simulation after simulation until the maneuvers became as natural as breathing. But no simulation could have prepared her for the reality of this moment. "Phase jump in 3 seconds, she announced to her crew. "Target the enemy flagship." Ben confirmed from engineering. "Shadow drive stable, ready when you are." Maya pulled the trigger, and the Nightfall slipped out of normal space. For one heartbeat, she was surrounded by the cold darkness of the Shadow Realm, that terrible place between dimensions where nothing human was meant to exist. Then they emerged directly behind its flagship, so close that she could see the individual panels of its hull. They fired everything they had. The weapons Dr. Cole's team had developed from precursor technology cut through armor like it was made of paper. The enemy flagship's engines exploded in a bloom of white fire. Secondary explosions rippled along its length as system after system failed. On his bridge, watched in horror as his mighty vessel began to die around him. "Impossible," he whispered. "This is impossible." But it was happening. All around him, his fleet was being torn apart by ships that could not be tracked, could not be targeted, could not be stopped. The humans appeared and disappeared at will, striking from angles that the laws of physics. Every tactic he tried failed. Every order he gave became meaningless the moment he spoke it. The battle lasted 4 hours. By the end, the armada was nothing but debris and drifting wreckage. Its flagship was crippled and captured, its commander taken prisoner by the species he had called primitive. Of the 800 warships that had started the engagement, fewer than 50 escaped. Admiral Grace watched the final tally come in from her command chair on the. Human losses were minimal. A handful of ships damaged, a few dozen crew members injured. They had faced the most feared military power in the galaxy and won a victory so complete that it seemed like a dream. She opened a channel to the Galactic Council. The faces that appeared on her screen were not laughing anymore. The ambassador stared at her with wide eyes, his silver skin pale with shock. The other species looked equally stunned, their expressions ranging from disbelief to something that might have been fear. "This is Admiral of the United Earth Defense Fleet," she said. "We have engaged and defeated the Armada at Prime. The enemy threat in this sector has been eliminated." "How?" the managed to ask. "How did you do this?" Grace smiled. It was not a cruel smile, not a gloating smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally been given the chance to show what they could do. "Humanity has been preparing for this day for longer than most of your civilizations have existed," she said. "We did not develop this technology to conquer. We did not build this fleet to threaten. We did this because we knew that someday the galaxy would need us, and we wanted to be ready." She leaned forward in her chair. "We are ready now. The question is, are you ready to stand beside us?" The council chamber was silent. For the first time in galactic history, the elder species had nothing to say. They could only stare at the human admiral on their screens and try to understand how everything they believed about humanity had been so completely wrong. On the Nightfall, Maya Torres allowed herself to sit down for the first time in hours. Her hands were shaking and her heart was still pounding, but she was smiling. They had done it. They had proven that humanity was not just worthy of respect, they were worthy of leading the galaxy itself. Ben appeared beside her, offering a cup of water. His face was tired but triumphant. "Not bad for a bunch of primitives," he said. Maya laughed, and the sound echoed through the bridge of the ship that had just changed history. The victory at Prime sent shockwaves through the entire galaxy. Species that had ignored humanity for a century suddenly wanted to know everything about them. Ambassadors who had once laughed at Earth's offers of help now begged for meetings with human commanders. The Galactic Council demanded answers, and after decades of secrecy, humanity finally decided to give them. Dr. Cole stood in the grand chamber of the council, surrounded by alien faces that watched him with mixtures of awe, fear, and desperate curiosity. He was not a military man or a politician. He was a scientist who had spent his life in an underground laboratory, and the attention of so many powerful beings made him uncomfortable. But he understood that this moment mattered. The truth he was about to share would change how every species in the galaxy understood their own history. 70 years ago, he began, his voice steady despite his nerves, a team of human explorers discovered something beneath the ice of Europa. It was a ship, larger than anything we had ever built, made of materials our instruments could barely analyze. It had been buried there for over 65 million years. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. 65 million years was before the rise of any known civilization. It was before the Confederation, before the elder species, before almost everything. "We call the builders of that ship the precursors," continued. "We do not know what they looked like or where they came from. What we do know is that they were the original founders of galactic civilization. They explored the stars when this galaxy was young, and then they vanished without a trace. Every species has legends about them, but no one has ever found solid proof of their existence, until we did." Activated a display that showed images of the Europa wreck and the artifacts his team had recovered. The technology was unlike anything the Council had seen, elegant and powerful in ways that their understanding of physics. "The precursors visited Earth during the age of dinosaurs," said. "They studied life on our planet and found something that interested them. We do not know why, but they left behind a genetic marker, a piece of their own technology woven into the DNA of Earth's creatures. Over millions of years, that marker passed from species to species. Eventually, it reached humanity." The ambassador leaned forward, his 4 hands gripping the edge of his desk. "Are you saying that humans are related to the precursors?" "Not related," said. "Designed. The precursors knew that their civilization would eventually end. They wanted to ensure that someone would carry on their work, someone who would inherit their technology and their purpose. They created humanity to be that successor." The chamber erupted in chaos. Aliens shouted questions and accusations. Some refused to believe what they were hearing. Others demanded proof, waited patiently until the noise died down, then continued. "The Europa wreck was not random debris. It was a message, placed there specifically for us to find when we were ready. The Shadow Gateway, the phase technology, the weapons we used against all of it was left for humanity to discover. We did not steal this power or stumble upon it by accident. It was given to us by beings who planned our existence millions of years before we were born." Commander Jake Harmon watched the Council's reaction from the visitors' gallery above. Beside him, Admiral observed with the calm patience of someone who had known this truth for years. Jake still remembered the shock he had felt when he first learned the real reason humanity had been hiding its capabilities. The idea that humans were part of some ancient cosmic plan was almost too big to accept. But he had seen the evidence. He had walked through the laboratories beneath Nevada and touched artifacts that hummed with power older than the stars. He knew that was telling the truth. The ambassador finally found his voice. "If the precursors left this technology for humanity, what did they intend you to do with it?" Hesitated. This was the part he had been dreading, the revelation that would change everything. "We believe the precursors had enemies," he said. "Something that drove them to extinction despite all their power. They left humanity as a backup plan, a species that could rise in their absence and finish what they started. We think they are connected to that ancient threat." The chamber fell silent. Even the most skeptical ambassadors understood the implications of what was saying. "Our intelligence suggests that the Empire discovered a fragment of precursor technology centuries ago," continued. "A corrupted piece, damaged and incomplete. They used it to build their civilization, but they did not understand what they had found. Their emperor has been searching for the Shadow Gateway for generations, believing that it will give him the power to rule the entire galaxy." Maya Torres received these briefings aboard the Nightfall as her ship traveled through the Shadow Realm toward space. She had been chosen to lead a small strike team on a mission that might determine the outcome of the entire war. Their target was the itself, a heavily defended planet at the heart of enemy territory. "The Emperor knows about the gateway now," Admiral had told her before departure. "He is gathering every ship in his empire for one final assault. If he captures the gateway, he will become unstoppable. We cannot let that happen." Maya studied the intelligence reports until she knew them by heart. There was called a harsh planet of metal and fire where the Emperor ruled from a fortress that had never been breached. According to their sources, the corrupted precursor technology was stored somewhere inside that fortress. If they could destroy it, the Empire would lose the foundation of its power. Ben worked around the clock to prepare the ship for what might be their final mission. He upgraded their weapons, strengthened their shields, and made dozens of small improvements to the Shadow Drive. When Maya asked him why he was pushing himself so hard, he simply smiled. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about humanity's future among the stars," he said. "He believed that someday, humans would prove themselves to the galaxy. He died before we joined the Confederation, before any of this started. I want to make sure his faith was not misplaced." The Nightfall emerged from the Shadow Realm on the edge of the system. Maya looked out at the enemy, a dark sphere surrounded by thousands of warships. The defenses were even stronger than their intelligence had suggested. Getting to the surface would be nearly impossible. But nearly impossible was not impossible, and Maya had not come this far to fail. "Begin the approach," she ordered. "Silent running, stay in the shadows until we reach the atmosphere." The Nightfall slipped forward, moving through the darkness between dimensions, invisible to every sensor they possessed. Behind them, the rest of the Shadow Squadron prepared for the largest battle in galactic history. Everything humanity had built, everything they had sacrificed, came down to this moment. Maya took a deep breath and guided her ship toward the fortress where the Emperor waited. The final confrontation was about to begin. The Emperor stood in his throne room at the heart of the great fortress, watching holographic displays that showed his fleet assembling from every corner of the Empire. 10,000 warships gathered around the Shadow Gateway, more military power than any species had ever collected in one place. He was an ancient creature, his body twisted by centuries of exposure to the corrupted precursor technology that had given his people their strength. He no longer looked like the other. He had become something else, something darker. "The gateway will be ours," he said to his generals, "and when we control it, nothing in this galaxy will stand against us." He did not know that a small human ship had already slipped past his defenses. He did not know that Maya Torres and her team were moving through the shadows beneath his fortress, getting closer with every passing minute. He thought victory was certain, because he could not imagine that anyone would be bold enough to strike at the heart of his empire. Far away, at the threshold of the Shadow Gateway, Admiral Grace prepared the combined fleet for the battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. The Shadow Squadron floated in formation alongside the surviving ships of the Galactic Confederation, species that had once dismissed humanity now fighting beside them as equals. It was the largest alliance in galactic history, and it might still not be enough. Commander Jake Harmon stood on the bridge of watching the armada take position on the other side of the gateway. The enemy ship stretched as far as sensors could detect, a wall of black metal and deadly weapons. His hands were steady, but his heart was pounding. "Admiral," he said quietly, "if we fail here, there will be nothing left to stop them." Nodded, "Then we will not fail." She opened a channel to all ships. Her voice carried across the fleet, reaching every pilot, every gunner, every engineer who waited at their station. "This is Admiral. What we do today will be remembered for as long as civilization exists. We fight not just for Earth, not just for the Confederation, but for every species that will ever look up at the stars and dream of reaching them. The belief that power is all that matters. Today, we prove them wrong." She took a breath. "All ships engage." The two fleets collided in a storm of fire and light. Human ships phased through the shadow realm, appearing and disappearing as they struck the enemy from impossible angles. Confederation vessels provided covering fire, their weapons working together with human technology in combinations that no one had ever attempted before. They fought back with savage fury, their ships exploding in beautiful cascades of flame as they were torn apart. Jake commanded through the chaos, directing squadrons, coordinating attacks, making decisions that cost lives and saved others. He had trained for this his entire career, but no amount of training could have prepared him for the scale of this battle. Ships died around him by the hundreds. The gateway itself seemed to shudder under the weight of so much destruction. Beneath the fortress Maya Torres led her team through corridors of black stone and pulsing machinery. They had bypassed the outer defenses using the shadow drive, materializing inside the walls where no one expected intruders. Now they moved toward the heart of the structure, where the corrupted precursor artifact waited. Ben walked beside her, carrying equipment that might allow them to destroy the artifact or might kill them all in the attempt. He had volunteered for this mission knowing he might not survive. Everyone on the team had made the same choice. "5 more levels," Maya whispered. "Stay close." They encountered guards, but the fight was brief and brutal. Human training and precursor weapons overwhelmed them before they could raise an alarm. Maya felt no joy in the killing. She felt only the weight of her responsibility, the knowledge that the entire war might depend on what happened in the next few minutes. The throne room doors stood before them, massive slabs of metal covered in symbols that glowed with sickly red light. Maya took a breath, steadied her weapon, and pushed through. The Emperor waited for her. He was taller than any she had ever seen, his body wrapped in armor that seemed to be made of living shadow. The corrupted precursor artifact floated behind him, a twisted sphere of darkness that pulsed with malevolent energy. He looked at Maya and her team with eyes that held no fear, only ancient hunger. "Humans," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I have waited centuries for your species to find the gateway. I knew you would come eventually. The precursors designed you to carry their legacy, but they did not design you to defeat me." He raised one hand, and the artifact behind him blazed with power. Maya felt pressure building in her skull, a force that wanted to crush her mind into nothing. "Your technology is strong," the Emperor continued, "but mine is older, darker, more patient." Maya forced herself to speak through the pain. "The precursors left the gateway for us because they knew someone like you would come. They trusted humanity to stop you." The Emperor laughed. "And you believe you can succeed where the precursors themselves failed." Maya looked at Ben, who nodded once. He had been working on something during their journey, modifying the equipment he carried into something new, something the precursors had hinted at in their ancient records but never completed. "The precursors did not fail," Maya said. "They planned, they waited, they created us." Ben activated the device. Pure light erupted from the equipment, light that came from the shadow realm itself, inverted and transformed into something that no corrupted technology could withstand. The artifact behind the Emperor screamed, a sound that was not sound but pure agony transmitted directly into the mind. The Emperor staggered backward, his armor cracking, his power failing. Maya fired her weapon at the artifact. The shot pierced its shell and released the darkness trapped inside. For one terrible moment, the throne room filled with shadow so complete that Maya could not see her own hands. Then the shadow collapsed inward, consuming itself, taking the corrupted technology with it. The Emperor fell to his knees. Without the artifact, he was just an old creature, twisted by power he had never truly understood. Maya stood over him, her weapon aimed at his head. "It is over," she said. At the Shadow Gateway, the fleet faltered. The ships that had seemed unstoppable moments before now moved in confusion, their coordination shattered. Something had broken their connection to their Emperor, and without his will driving them, they did not know how to fight. Admiral saw the change and pressed the advantage. All ships, full attack, pushed them back. The combined fleet surged forward. Human and Confederation vessels fought side by side, breaking through lines that had seemed impenetrable. One by one, enemy ships surrendered or fled. The battle that had seemed unwinnable turned into a rout, and then into victory. Jake Harmon stood on the bridge of as the last warship jumped away. The gateway was secure. The enemy was broken. Against all odds, they had won. He allowed himself to breathe. The war was over. 3 months later, Commander Jake Harmon stood on the observation deck of as the first sunrise after the peace treaty bathed the fleet in golden light. The Galactic Confederation had reformed around humanity's leadership, and the species that had once dismissed Earth as primitive now looked to humans for guidance. It was more responsibility than Jake had ever imagined carrying, but he knew that humanity was ready for it. Maya Torres joined him, her uniform bearing new insignia that marked her as one of the heroes of the war. She looked tired but content, a woman who had done the impossible and lived to see the result. "What happens now?" she asked. Jake looked out at the stars, at the galaxy that humanity had saved. "Now we rebuild. We explore. We prove that the precursors were right to put their faith in us." Somewhere behind them, Ben was already working on upgrades for the shadow drives, planning expeditions to regions of space that no one had ever visited. Dr. Cole had returned to his laboratory, searching the precursor records for more secrets that might help protect the galaxy in the future. Admiral was meeting with the Reformed Council, helping shape policies that would govern the new era of peace. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again, but more importantly, humanity would never forget the lessons they had learned. Power meant nothing without the wisdom to use it well. Strength meant nothing without the courage to protect the weak. Jake smiled as the golden light warmed his face. The Shadow Gateway had been released, and humanity had stepped through it into a future brighter than anyone had dared to dream. The stars were waiting, and for the first time in galactic history, Earth was ready to lead the way.